The officiant's voice cracked the golden air of the vineyard like a struck glass. "If anyone here believes these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now, or forever hold your peace." Delaney Frost was holding a bouquet of white ranunculus and thistle, and her hands had gone strange to her, foreign, as if they belonged to someone standing a few feet outside of her own body. The stems were slick with the sweat of her palms. 200 faces had gone still behind her, a held breath spread across white folding chairs between rows of Cabernet vines, heavy with late July fruit, and somewhere a photographer's shutter clicked once, twice, capturing nothing anyone would want to remember. She was not supposed to be the one this moment belonged to. She was the maid of honor. She was furniture in expensive taffeta, a prop whose only job was to hold flowers and not cry before the vows started. That was the whole of her function today, and she had rehearsed it, had told herself in the mirror that morning that she could do this one last, generous thing. Then Sabine Laurent turned her head. It was such a small motion. A bride is supposed to look at her groom, or, in this case, at Priya's face, luminous and expectant under a veil that had cost more than Delaney's rent, at the woman she was 2 sentences away from marrying. Instead, Sabine's eyes slid past her, over the officiant's shoulder, past the arch of white orchids, and found Delaney's. They held. It was not the look of a nervous bride searching the crowd for a familiar face to steady her. Delaney had seen that look before, at other weddings, and it lasted half a second and then moved on, grateful and light. This was not that. This was a question asked without words, a door held open on a single, unbearable hinge. Sabine's jaw was tight. Her eyes were too bright, too fixed, and behind them Delaney could read something that had no business existing in a bride's face 4 feet from her own wedding vows. Pure, undisguised pleading. Say something. Delaney's pulse moved into her throat and stayed there, a fist against a door. Somewhere behind her, Priya's mother shifted in her seat, the silk of her sari rustling like a warning. The officiant's question was still hanging in the air, unclaimed, and every second that passed without an answer was itself becoming an answer. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Delaney knew, with the strange clarity that comes only in the worst moments of a life, that whatever she did next, whether she opened her mouth or clamped it shut, whether she let her eyes fall away or held Sabine's gaze 1 second longer than was safe, she was about to become the kind of person she would have to live with forever. There was no version of the next 10 seconds that let her stay who she had been an hour ago. The bouquet trembled almost imperceptibly in her hands. And somewhere far beneath the golden light and the waiting silence, a memory surfaced without permission. A kitchen 6 months earlier, a burst of laughter, a woman in a green dress turning around to be introduced, saying, in an accent that belonged to no single country, "So you're the famous Delaney." But to understand what was happening at that altar, to understand why a woman who loved her best friend more than almost anyone on earth was now standing perfectly still while the truth threatened to come apart in her hands, you have to go back. Not to the beginning of the wedding, to the beginning of everything. It started, as these things so often do, with a birthday dinner that nobody thought would matter. Priya Anand turned 30 on a Tuesday in January, and she did what she always did with things that mattered to her. She planned it within an inch of its life. A private room at a restaurant with exposed brick and candles that dripped real wax. A playlist she'd built over 3 weeks. Name cards written in her own careful hand because she didn't trust anyone else's penmanship with something so important. Delaney had known Priya since their sophomore year of college, when they'd been assigned as roommates, and discovered, within the first week, that they were exact opposites who somehow fit. Priya organized, forward-looking, incapable of leaving a task half-finished. Delaney the one who kept the emergency contact numbers in a drawer she never opened, and made a joke out of everything that frightened her. They had been through 2 decades of each other's disasters. Delaney had held Priya's hair back after her first heartbreak in a dorm bathroom that smelled of bleach and regret. Priya had shown up at Delaney's apartment with soup and silence the week Delaney's mother died, understanding, without being told, that silence was the only thing Delaney could stand to receive. So when Priya said, over the phone 2 weeks before the birthday dinner, "I'm bringing someone. I want you to meet her first, before anyone else," Delaney had felt something warm and proprietary rise in her chest. Priya trusted her judgment above anyone's. It was, in its way, the highest compliment her best friend knew how to give. Her, Delaney had repeated. Okay, tell me everything. Her name is Sabine. I met her at a gallery opening. She does something with wine importing. Or she used to. I don't totally understand it. And honestly, I don't care, because she's the funniest, most alive person I've met in years. And Delaney, I haven't felt like this in, I don't know, maybe ever. Delaney remembered laughing, delighted for her friend in the uncomplicated way. You can only be delighted before you know what a thing will cost you. Bring her. I'll be nice. I'm always nice. You're never nice, you're funny, which is different, and sometimes crueler. I'll be funny and kind. A rare combination, reserved for special occasions. She had meant it as a joke. She had no reason, standing in her kitchen with the phone tucked against her shoulder and a pot of pasta water coming to boil behind her, to suspect that in 14 days her life would develop a fault line running straight down its center, with everything that came before on one side and everything that came after on the other. The dinner itself she would replay so many times in the months that followed that the memory eventually wore soft and imprecise at the edges, the way a photograph fades when you hold it too often in direct light. But certain details stayed sharp no matter how many times she returned to them. The green dress, the low, unhurried way Sabine Laurent spoke, as if she had never once in her life needed to rush toward the end of a sentence. The fact that when Priya introduced them, "Delaney, this is Sabine. Sabine, this is the most important person in my life besides you, so behave." Sabine had looked at Delaney for one full beat too long before extending her hand and said, "So you're the famous Delaney," in a tone that made the word famous sound like it meant something closer to dangerous. "Infamous, actually," Delaney had said. "There's a difference. Ask anyone who's dated me." "I intend to," Sabine said, and there was a small silence in which Priya, oblivious, was already flagging down the waiter for another bottle of the Sancerre, and something passed between the two of them that neither one could have named yet, because naming it would have required admitting it existed. Sabine Laurent was, by any accounting, extraordinary. Half French, half American, raised between Lyon and a series of American cities depending on which parent had custody that year, she had the specific restlessness of someone who had never fully belonged anywhere and had turned that rootlessness into a kind of gravity instead of a wound. She spoke 4 languages badly, and one, English, with a precision that made native speakers feel sloppy. She laughed with her whole chest. She noticed things, the particular way a stranger held their fork, the fact that Delaney had rearranged the restaurant's flower centerpiece twice during the meal, without seeming to realize she was doing it, a nervous habit Delaney herself had never named. By the end of that first dinner, Sabine had asked Delaney 4 questions for every one Priya asked, and Delaney had answered every single one of them more honestly than she meant to. She told herself, walking home that night under a cold January sky, that this was simply what happened when someone paid careful attention to you. It felt like being seen, that was all. It did not mean anything. She told herself a great many things over the following months, and very few of them turned out to be true. Priya and Sabine moved fast. Faster than Delaney, privately thought was wise, though she never said so aloud, because Priya was 30 and clear-eyed, and had never asked for anyone's permission to be happy. Within 4 months, there was a shared apartment in the Mission, with exposed pipes Sabine insisted on calling industrial romantic. Within 5 months, there was a ring, presented not by Sabine's family, who were scattered and largely absent, but blessed enthusiastically by Priya's mother, Mira, who had been quietly worried her daughter would never settle and treated the engagement as a national holiday. And almost immediately there was a wedding to plan, a wedding that, because Priya trusted no one's taste and judgment more than her best friend's, required Delaney's presence at nearly every turn. Cake tastings, venue walkthroughs, A 4-hour debate over sample linens in 3 different shades of ivory that Delaney could not, to save her life, distinguish from one another. And dress fittings, those most of all, because Priya had chosen, without any apparent awareness of what she was doing, to be fitted at the same appointments as Sabine, so that Delaney found herself, week after week, in a small, overheated room, watching Sabine Laurent turn in front of a 3-way mirror in increasingly finished versions of the dress she would wear to marry someone else. "Zip me," Sabine said one evening in March, in a fitting room that smelled of steam and pins, turning her back and lifting the fall of her hair off her neck with one hand. Delaney's fingers found the zipper's pull tab. The fabric was cool. Sabine's skin, just beneath it, was not. She dragged the zipper up slowly. It caught twice on delicate lace and had to be worked free. And in the mirror she watched Sabine watching her. Not the dress, not her own reflection, but Delaney's face in the glass, with an attention that had nowhere safe to land. "There," Delaney said, when it was done, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Thank you," Sabine said, and did not move away. It was such small moments that built the architecture of what neither of them could yet call anything. A hand that stayed a beat too long on a forearm during a toast. A text at 1 a.m. "Can't sleep, thinking about seating charts, is that insane?" That had nothing to do with seating charts and everything to do with the particular loneliness of being surrounded by wedding planning and feeling, increasingly, unable to breathe inside it. Delaney would type long replies and delete them, would write, "I think about you more than I should," and watch the cursor blink over it, before backspacing letter by letter until the message box sat empty again, her thumb hovering, her chest tight, with something she refused to call by its name. Here is the detail that mattered more than any other, though nobody understood its weight at the time. Sabine wore, always, a thin gold chain with a single seed pearl, a gift from her French grandmother, and she had a habit, unconscious, constant, of running her thumb along it whenever she was nervous, or lying, or both. Delaney noticed it the way she noticed everything about Sabine, which is to say, completely, and without permission. She would remember it later. She would understand, far too late, that every time Sabine touched that chain during those months, she was holding something back. Before we go further, it's worth pausing here, because if this story is already sitting heavy in your chest, that's exactly where it's meant to sit. Go ahead and hit like, subscribe if you haven't, because there are more stories like this one, about the choices we make when love arrives at the worst possible time, and they deserve to be told all the way through, together. Now come back with me, because the night everything nearly broke open happened 3 weeks before the wedding, at a bachelorette party in a rented house outside Healdsburg, and it did not happen the way anyone expected. The bachelorette weekend had been Priya's idea down to the smallest detail, of course. A farmhouse with a pool, a private chef for one night, a schedule printed on cardstock with a rose gold foil border. 12 women, most of them Priya's cousins and co-workers, all of them a little drunk by 9 o'clock on wine, that Sabine, with her old industry knowledge, had chosen and would not stop narrating. Delaney had spent the evening performing a version of herself built entirely for the occasion, the wisecracking maid of honor, generous with toasts, quick with a joke to smooth over any awkward silence, the friend who could be trusted to keep things light. It was a costume she had worn so often over the past 6 months that some nights she forgot she had put it on. Around midnight, the party thinned. Priya, exhausted and happy, had gone to bed early with a headache and a smile, kissed by every woman in the room on her way up the stairs like a queen, retiring from her own coronation. The others drifted toward the pool, toward their phones, toward sleep. Delaney found herself alone on the back porch with a glass of wine she wasn't really drinking, looking out at a vineyard identical in almost every way to the one where, 3 weeks later, she would stand holding a bouquet that wasn't hers. Sabine came out and sat beside her without asking. She smelled of chlorine and the specific vanilla note of the candle burning on the porch rail. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The night was warm enough that the silence didn't feel cold, only full. Full the way a held breath is full. "Can I tell you something?" Sabine said finally. And you have to promise not to make it into a joke. I make everything into a joke. It's my one skill. Delaney. Something in the way she said the name, not the nickname, not any of the affectionate shorthand that had built up between them over 6 months, but the full, careful weight of it, made Delaney go still. Okay, she said. No jokes. Sabine looked at the pool. Its surface lit an unnatural turquoise from below, rather than at Delaney, and that too felt deliberate. A woman choosing not to look at the person she was about to tell the truth to. I don't think I should be doing this, she said. The wedding. I don't think. She stopped, started again. I love Priya. I need you to know that first, because it's true, and it's not going to stop being true, just because I'm about to say something terrible. I love her, but loving someone and being certain you should marry them are not the same thing, and I don't think anyone told me that before now. Or maybe they did and I didn't want to hear it. Delaney's glass had stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down very carefully on the porch rail, as if any sudden movement might shatter something larger than the glass. Sabine! I bought a plane ticket, Sabine said, and the confession came out of her fast now, like something that had been damned too long. 3 weeks ago, to Lisbon. I don't even know why Lisbon. I've never been. I think I picked it because it felt far enough away that I couldn't talk myself out of it once I landed. It's in my bag right now, upstairs. I haven't told anyone. I don't know why I'm telling you. You should talk to Priya, Delaney heard herself say, in a voice that sounded, to her own ears, like it belonged to someone playing the role of a good friend in a film about someone else's crisis. If you're feeling like this, she deserves to know before. I know what she deserves. Sabine's voice cracked, just slightly, on the last word. I know exactly what she deserves. And it isn't this, and it isn't me standing on a porch at midnight 3 weeks before her wedding, telling her best friend that I bought a one-way ticket out of my own life, instead of telling her. I'm a coward. I've known that about myself for a long time. I just didn't think it would cost this much to find out. And then she turned, finally, and looked at Delaney directly, and there it was again, that same look Delaney would see across an altar 3 weeks later, except this time there was no veil, no audience, no ceremony to interrupt it. Just 2 women on a porch, close enough that Delaney could see the small gold chain at Sabine's throat catch the candlelight, close enough to see Sabine's thumb move, unconsciously, to touch the pearl at its end. Delaney? Sabine said again, quieter now. Do you ever think about... The porch door banged open. One of Priya's cousins, laughing, phone flashlight blazing, stumbled out looking for her sandals, and the moment did not so much end as get amputated, cauterized mid-sentence, and neither of them ever finished it. By the time the cousin found her shoes and disappeared back inside, Sabine had already stood, already smoothed her dress, already rebuilt, in under 10 seconds, the composed and radiant bride-to-be that the rest of the weekend required of her. Forget I said anything, she said, not looking back as she walked to the door. I'm drunk. It's nothing. I love her. Good night, Delaney. Delaney sat alone on the porch for a long time after that, watching the pool light shiver on the water, and did not sleep at all that night, replaying 4 words. Do you ever think about, and trying, without success, to imagine any ending to that sentence that wouldn't have destroyed something? She almost told Priya, twice, in the 2 weeks that followed. Once, standing in Priya's kitchen, while her friend addressed envelopes with a precision that bordered on liturgical, Delaney opened her mouth to say something true, and instead said, Are you sure about the seating chart for Table 9? Your aunt hates Raj. And watched the moment pass, grateful and ashamed in equal measure. The second time, she actually typed a message to Priya, Can we talk? It's important, not really about the wedding, and stared at it for 11 minutes before deleting it entirely, telling herself that it wasn't her secret to tell, that Sabine deserved the chance to say it herself, that she was protecting her best friend by staying silent, when the truth, underneath all of that careful reasoning, was simpler and far less noble. She was terrified of what would happen to her own life if she was the one who said it out loud. There is a version of this story where Delaney calls Priya that week, and everything that follows is different. She thought about that version often, later. She never let herself finish imagining it. What she didn't know, what none of them knew that week, was that Sabine had, in fact, tried. 4 days after the bachelorette party, Sabine had sat Priya down at their kitchen table, industrial pipes overhead, and told her she had doubts, real ones, and needed to talk before they went any further. It should have been the end of the story right there, honestly and cleanly, the way these things are supposed to end when someone finds the courage. But Mira Anand had, by chance, arrived 20 minutes into that conversation, unannounced, carrying a box of wedding favors she'd ordered without asking anyone, and had walked into a scene her daughter would later describe to Delaney, in the wreckage of everything, months afterward, as the worst 30 seconds of my entire life. Mira, seeing her daughter's tear-streaked face and misreading the entire situation as ordinary pre-wedding jitters, had launched into a 20-minute monologue about how every bride gets cold feet, about her own doubts before marrying Priya's father 34 years ago, about the shame it would bring on the family to cancel a wedding 200 people had already bought flights for, about how love isn't a feeling you wait to arrive perfectly formed, but a decision you renew every day. She had not asked a single question about what Sabine actually meant by doubts. She had simply talked until the room ran out of air for any other kind of conversation, and by the time she left, satisfied that she had once again solved a problem through sheer force of certainty, Sabine had gone quiet in the particular way of someone who has decided it is easier to disappear into a decision already made than to fight for one that hasn't been. "I'll be fine," Sabine had told Priya that night, folding the doubt back into herself like something too dangerous to leave out in the open. "I'm sorry. Wedding stress. Ignore me." Priya, wanting badly to believe it, believed it. None of this reached Delaney. She only knew that the days kept turning over, that the wedding kept approaching with the terrible patience of something that cannot be stopped by wishing, and that every interaction with Sabine now carried a static charge neither of them acknowledged and both of them felt. There was a night, 10 days before the wedding, when Delaney, helping address the last of the invitations no one had gotten around to, found herself alone in the apartment with Sabine, while Priya ran to the dry cleaner. Sabine was quiet, distracted, sorting through a box of ribbon samples with more concentration than ribbon had ever deserved. "You said something," Delaney finally said, unable to hold it any longer. "At the bachelorette, you started to ask me something." Sabine's hands stopped moving over the ribbon. For a moment, Delaney thought she might finally say it, whatever it was, whatever question had died on that porch, and something in her chest lurched forward to meet it, ready, terrified, wanting. "I don't remember," Sabine said instead, not looking up. "I was drunk. I told you that." It was, Delaney would later understand, the precise moment the two of them made an unspoken agreement to lie to each other for the sake of a third person neither of them wanted to hurt. It felt, at the time, almost like relief, the exhausting tension of the unnamed thing finally being allowed to go quiet. It would not stay quiet for long. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't a simple love story, and it isn't trying to be one. It's something messier and truer than that, and I think you can feel where it's heading. Stay with me, because what happens next changes everything you think you understand about who these three women really are. And if this story is pulling something out of you, share it with someone who needs a story like this today. The morning of the wedding arrived with the kind of cruel, cloudless beauty California mornings specialize in, as if the sky itself hadn't gotten the memo that something was about to come apart. Delaney spent it in a suite with 8 other women, curling irons hissing, Prosecco poured too early, Priya luminous and weeping happy, undramatic tears, while her mother fussed with the hem of her gown. Delaney did her job. She fastened buttons. She delivered a toast at the bridal brunch that made the whole room laugh, and then, at its end, quietly cry, because she had written it 3 separate times trying to find language that was true, without being a confession, and what she'd landed on. "Priya taught me that the people who see you most clearly are the ones brave enough to stay," had cost her more than anyone in that room could have known. She did not see Sabine get ready. The brides had insisted on separate suites. a small traditional flourish in an otherwise unconventional wedding, and so the first time Delaney saw her that day was down the aisle, an hour before the vows, when Sabine walked toward the altar in a column of ivory silk, with her grandmother's pearl resting, as always, at the base of her throat. Sabine did not look at Delaney then. She looked at Priya, waiting at the altar under an arch woven with white orchids and trailing jasmine, and for one long, aching moment Delaney let herself believe that whatever had happened on that porch, whatever had almost been said in that apartment, had genuinely resolved itself into nothing, that people could, in fact, choose the life in front of them and mean it. She believed it for exactly as long as it took the ceremony to reach its final question. The officiant, an old family friend of Mira's with a voice built for exactly this kind of occasion, moved through the standard vows, through the readings Priya had chosen months ago, through the exchange of rings. Sabine's hands steady, Priya's shaking slightly with joy, and arrived, as ceremonies do, at the traditional moment nobody expects to matter. If anyone here believes these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now, or forever hold your peace. It is, in most weddings, a formality. A held breath followed immediately by relieved laughter, a line everyone recognizes from 100 other ceremonies, and nobody takes literally. Delaney had heard it said at a dozen weddings before this one, and never once felt the floor shift beneath her. This time, Sabine turned her head. This is the moment you have already seen. This is the moment the whole of this story has been circling since its first line. Delaney standing with the bouquet trembling faintly in her hands, Sabine's eyes locking onto hers instead of returning to Priya, that unbearable, wordless plea passing between them in front of 200 witnesses who saw nothing at all, because it happened in less time than it takes to draw a breath. But now you know what that look contained. Now you know about the porch, and the unfinished sentence, and the plane ticket to Lisbon still folded in a bag, somewhere behind the bridal suite, and the conversation interrupted by a mother who mistook her daughter's fiancé's terror for ordinary nerves. Now you know that this was not a stranger's dramatic flourish. This was a woman who had tried, twice, in her own imperfect way, to stop what was happening, and who was now, in the last possible second the universe was going to give her, silently asking someone else to do what she could not do herself. Speak now. Say something. Give me a reason. Delaney felt the question land in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples of it moving outward through everything she'd told herself for 6 months, that it meant nothing, that she'd imagined it, that loyalty and love could occupy the same room without one having to destroy the other. She thought of Priya at 19, holding her hair back in a dorm bathroom. She thought of Priya at her mother's funeral, saying nothing, simply staying. She thought of the seed pearl at Sabine's throat and the particular way her thumb moved to touch it, always, when she was about to lie or about to tell the truth. And Delaney realized, in that last unbearable second, that she had never learned to tell the difference between the two. 200 people were watching a bride and a maid of honor, and not one of them understood that the entire architecture of 3 lives was balanced, right then, on whatever Delaney chose to do with her mouth. She closed it. She looked down at the bouquet instead of at Sabine, watched a single white ranunculus petal tremble loose from its stem and drift, absurdly slow, to the grass by her shoe, and she said nothing. The silence stretched 2 seconds, 3, long enough that somewhere in the crowd someone shifted, uncomfortable without knowing why, and then the officiant, unaware he had just watched the most consequential silence of 3 women's lives pass by unremarked, smiled and moved on. Then by the power vested in me. Delaney did not hear the rest of it. She heard blood in her own ears, and the specific, awful sound of Priya's small, joyful gasp as Sabine turned back to face her, and the vineyard's applause rising up around all of them like something designed specifically to bury what had just happened. She watched Sabine's hand find Priya's. She watched the rings catch the light. She watched her best friend become someone's wife, while the woman who had just silently asked her to stop it looked, for exactly one more heartbeat, back over Priya's shoulder, not with anger, not even with disappointment, but with something worse. Quiet, total understanding. Sabine had asked, and Delaney had answered, and the answer was no, and both of them knew it, and neither of them would ever be able to say so out loud, because saying it would mean admitting the question had existed in the first place. Delaney told herself, walking back down that aisle behind the new Mrs. Anand Laurent an hour later, that she had done the right thing, the generous thing, the thing a good friend, a good person, does. She told herself this so many times over the following months that the sentence began to lose its shape entirely, the way any word does when you repeat it past the point of meaning. It did not feel like nobility. It felt, from the very first night, like a slow-burning wound that never fully closed, because doing the right thing had not actually protected anyone. It had simply delayed the damage and redirected it and made it worse. For a while, 3 months, almost 4, it seemed as though the silence might hold. Priya and Sabine settled into the ordinary rhythms of a new marriage, a honeymoon in Portugal that Delaney noted, with a private wince she never let show on her face, included 2 days in Lisbon, framed wedding photos arriving from the photographer and getting hung with great ceremony in the apartment's narrow hallway. The low-grade domestic dramas of thank you cards and joint bank accounts, and whose family to visit for the holidays. Delaney kept her distance in small, careful increments, declining a dinner here, citing a work deadline there, telling herself she was simply giving the marriage room to breathe, when what she was actually doing was trying to survive her own decision one day at a time. Sabine texted her twice during those months. Both times brief, almost formal, a birthday message, a forwarded article about a gallery show she thought Delaney might like. Both times Delaney answered with careful, friendly nothing, the tone of two people who have agreed, without ever discussing it, to become strangers to each other slowly enough that it doesn't look like what it is. It might have stayed that way. It might have become one of those griefs that simply calcifies quietly inside a person and never surfaces again, if Sabine had been able to keep living the life she had chosen at that altar. She could not. The letter arrived on a Thursday in late October, 4 months after the wedding, left on the kitchen table of the apartment with the exposed industrial pipes, weighted down by nothing more than the salt shaker, because Sabine had not trusted herself to say any of it out loud. Priya found it when she came home from work at 6:40 in the evening, still in her coat, and read it standing up, because some things you cannot bring yourself to sit down for. Delaney never saw the letter. She would spend the rest of her life imagining its exact words and never once landing on a version that felt complete, because Priya, when she finally spoke to her about it, once, only once, 3 weeks later, in a conversation that lasted 11 minutes and ended their friendship permanently, would not repeat it in full. She would only say certain fragments, delivered in a voice scraped hollow of everything it used to hold for Delaney. That Sabine had written that she loved her, and that the love was real, and that it was also not enough, because somewhere underneath it, unresolved, was a feeling for someone else that she had never had the courage to name, not on the porch in Healdsburg, not at the kitchen table when Mira walked in, not at the altar when she'd turned her head and asked with her eyes for someone to save her from herself and been met with silence. She hadn't written Delaney's name. She hadn't needed to. Priya had put it together within the first 2 paragraphs. The wedding dress fittings, the late fittings, the strange charged quiet that used to fall over a room when the 3 of them were in it together, and Priya had mistaken, for months, for closeness, rather than what it actually was. By the time Priya called Delaney, she was not asking a question. She already knew the answer. She was only confirming the shape of her own devastation. "Did something happen between you two?" Priya said, and her voice had none of its usual warmth in it, none of the easy, decades-old affection that had carried them through every disaster either of them had ever survived. It was flat, careful, the voice of someone building a wall in real time, brick by brick, because it was the only thing keeping her upright. "No," Delaney said, and it was, technically, true. Nothing had happened, not in the way the word usually means. No kiss, no touch beyond a zipper pulled slowly up a spine, no words that couldn't be explained away as friendship. But she heard her own voice waver on the single syllable. heard the half-second of hesitation before it, and she knew, with sick certainty, that Priya had heard it too. "Don't," Priya said. "Don't do that. Don't give me the technically true answer. I've known you for 14 years, Delaney. I know what your voice sounds like when you're about to lie to protect me, and I have heard it exactly 4 times in 14 years, and I am hearing it right now." Delaney closed her eyes. On the other end of the line, she could hear Priya's apartment, the particular hum of the refrigerator, a car passing on the street below, sounds so familiar they had once meant nothing, and now felt like the last artifacts of a country she was being permanently deported from. "I never acted on anything," Delaney said finally, and it came out smaller than she meant it to. "I swear to you, Priya, nothing happened. I would never. But you felt something. It wasn't a question." The silence that followed was the second most important silence of Delaney's life, and unlike the first, this one she did not choose. It simply happened to her, her throat closing around every possible answer, none of them adequate, none of them capable of undoing what 4 months of careful non-answers had already done. "Yes," she said finally. Priya made a sound then that Delaney had never heard her make before, not once in 14 years, not at her mother's funeral, not through any of the small and large griefs they'd carried each other through. A sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a laugh, something in between, something that seemed to come from a part of a person reserved for exactly this kind of betrayal, and no other. "At my wedding," she said, "you were standing 4 feet away from me, holding my flowers, and you knew, and you said nothing. I thought," Delaney started and stopped, because every version of the sentence that followed sounded, even to her, like a justification for cowardice, dressed up as loyalty. "I thought silence was the kind thing. I thought if I said nothing, no one would get hurt. I thought I was protecting you." She had believed all of it, sincerely, in the moment. None of it changed what it had actually cost. "I don't want to hear what you thought," Priya said. "I spent 6 months planning a wedding with the 2 people I loved most in this world, circling something they never had the decency to tell me about. I stood at that altar, believing I was marrying someone who loved only me, surrounded by the person I trusted most to protect me from exactly this kind of thing, and both of you let me do it anyway. Do you understand what that makes the last year of my life? It makes it a lie I helped build with my own hands while everyone around me knew better. Priya, please." "Don't call me again," Priya said, and her voice cracked, finally, all the way open on those 4 words. 14 years of friendship compressing themselves into a single, final fracture. "I mean it, Delaney. I don't know how to be in a world where you're still in it right now. Maybe that changes. I don't know. But not now. Don't call me." The line went dead before Delaney could say anything else, and there was, in the end, nothing else to say that could have mattered. If you're still with me, you already know there's no clean way out of a story like this. No version where everyone gets what they deserve, or even what they wanted. That's exactly why it's worth sitting with. If it's landed somewhere true for you, take a second and share it with someone who might need it today. Some stories are better carried by more than one person. We're almost at the end now, and I promise you, it's going to stay with you. Delaney did not hear from Sabine for another 6 weeks. When she finally did, it was not a phone call, but a knock at her apartment door on a rain-flattened evening in December, and when Delaney opened it, Sabine was standing in the hallway in a coat too thin for the weather, her hair damp, the seed pearl still resting at her throat, though Delaney noticed, could not stop herself from noticing, that her thumb was not touching it. For the first time since Delaney had known her, Sabine's hands were simply still. "I left," Sabine said, without preamble, as if the conversation had already been going on for some time, and this was merely its next sentence. 3 weeks ago. I wasn't being fair to her, staying. I wasn't being fair to anyone, least of all myself. And I know that sounds like the most self-serving sentence a person can say, and maybe it is, but it's also true." "I know," Delaney said. "Priya called me, months ago, about the letter." Something in Sabine's face shifted. Surprise, maybe, or a kind of relief that the hardest part of the conversation had already, apparently, happened without her having to say it out loud a second time. "Then you know what I wrote." I know she read it out loud. Some of it. "I meant it," Sabine said. "Every word. I did love her. I do, actually, still, in the way you love someone you've badly hurt and can never fully explain yourself to again. But it wasn't. It was never going to be enough, and I think some part of me knew that from the first dinner, the one where I met you, and I spent a year trying to convince myself that knowing wasn't the same as certainty, that I could build a whole life on top of a doubt if I just wanted it badly enough. You can't. I found that out the hard way, and I took Priya down with me while I was finding it out, and there is no version of this where I get to feel okay about that. Ever." Delaney stood in the doorway, rain sounding faintly against the building's old windows, and felt something rise in her chest that she had spent 6 months refusing to let all the way to the surface. Not joy, not yet, not with Priya's voice still echoing in her memory, flat and broken, saying, "Don't call me again." Something closer to terror, because here, finally, impossibly, was the sentence that had died on a porch in Healdsburg, standing fully formed in her doorway, with nowhere left to hide behind. "Why are you here?" Delaney said, though she already knew. "Because I've spent a year not finishing a sentence I started saying to you at a bachelorette party," Sabine said, "and I am done not finishing it. Do you ever think about, that's how it started? Do you remember? I never got to say the rest. I think about you constantly, Delaney. I have thought about you since the night we met, in a green dress, at a birthday dinner, and I married someone else anyway because it felt like the responsible thing, the kind thing, the thing that wouldn't destroy anyone, and I destroyed everyone regardless. I would like to ask you the rest of that question now, if you'll let me, even though I know exactly how much it costs both of us for me to ask it." Delaney thought of Priya's voice on the phone. She thought of 14 years, of a dorm bathroom, of soup delivered in silence after her mother's funeral, of a friendship that had, until 4 months ago, been the most stable structure in her entire adult life, and was now simply gone. A door closed so completely she didn't know if there would ever be a version of the future where it opened again. She thought, too, of the altar, of the 3 seconds she'd had to choose and what she had chosen, and how the world had punished everyone involved for that choice regardless of how carefully, how nobly, she believed she'd made it. Silence had not saved anyone. It had only delayed the wreckage and let it grow larger in the waiting. "I can't," Delaney said, and watched something in Sabine's face fold in on itself, quietly, the way paper does when it's finally given up trying to hold its shape. "Not because I don't. Sabine, I've thought about you every single day since that dinner too, but I can't build anything with you on top of what it cost to get here. Priya isn't just your ex-wife. She's the person who taught me what loyalty was supposed to mean, and I already failed her once by staying silent when I should have spoken. I won't finish failing her by being the reason none of this was ever really about her at all. I need to not be the ending of this story. Not like this." Sabine did not argue. She simply nodded, once, in the particular way of someone who had expected this answer, and had come anyway, because some questions have to be asked, even when you already know the cost of asking them, and then she turned and walked back down the hallway, and Delaney closed the door, and stood with her back against it for a long time, listening to the rain, feeling the specific, hollowed-out ache of having done, once again, the thing that looked like the right choice from the outside, and felt, on the inside, like watching something precious drown 2 feet from shore, while your hands stayed at your sides. 3 weeks later, Sabine came back to the building. Delaney learned this only afterward, from the building's doorman, an old man named Felix who had known her for years and mentioned it in passing, apologetically, the way you mention something you suspect will hurt someone you like. A woman had come looking for her on a Tuesday afternoon, he said, French accent, very insistent, wouldn't leave a note. Delaney had already moved by then, a new position in Seattle she'd applied for on a whim 2 months earlier, and accepted with a speed that surprised even her, packing her apartment into boxes in 11 days flat, telling everyone who asked that it was simply a good opportunity, professionally, and letting them believe that was the whole truth. She had told no one where she was going, not out of cruelty, out of the desperate, half-formed hope that distance might do what willpower alone had failed to do, that somewhere far enough away from both women, she might finally stop being the fault line running through both their lives. Sabine stood, Felix said, in the building's lobby for almost 20 minutes, looking up at the darkened windows of an apartment that no longer belonged to anyone Delaney knew, and then she left, and no one, not Felix, not Delaney, not Priya, wherever she was now, rebuilding a life out of the pieces the last two people she trusted had left behind, ever quite knew what she had meant to say if she'd found her there. Delaney thinks about it still, on nights when Seattle rain sounds almost, but not quite, like the rain that fell the last time she saw Sabine's face. She thinks about the 3 seconds at the altar more than she thinks about almost anything else in her adult life, turns them over and over, examining them from every angle, and she has never once managed to arrive at a version of that moment where speaking would have made things simpler, or where staying silent could have kept anyone safe. Both paths, she has come to understand, led to the same wreckage. She simply chose which order the losses arrived in. She lost Priya on the day of a phone call in October. She lost whatever might have existed with Sabine on a rainy December evening in a doorway. And underneath both of those losses, quieter, harder to name, she lost the version of herself who believed that doing the kind thing and doing the right thing were always, reliably, the same act. They are not. Sometimes the kindest-looking choice is simply the one that lets you avoid being the person who has to say the hard thing out loud, and the bill for that avoidance does not disappear just because you were too afraid to open it at the time. It only grows interest, quietly, in the dark, until someone, everyone, is finally forced to pay it all at once. There is no tidy ending here. No reunion at an airport. No message from Priya, years later, saying she understands now. No version of Sabine reappearing to finish the sentence that first began on a porch outside Healdsburg, with the pool lights glowing turquoise beneath them. Some stories don't resolve. Some doors, once closed, simply stay closed, not out of cruelty, but because too much passed through them on the way out, for them to ever swing open the same way again. What Delaney carries instead is a single, unanswerable question, one she suspects she will carry for the rest of her life, turning it over the way Sabine used to turn that seed pearl between her fingers. If you are given 3 seconds to choose between the person you love and the person who loves you, and speaking will hurt someone you'd die to protect, is silence really the generous choice? Or is it simply the version of cowardice that lets you keep believing you're a good person, while everyone around you quietly pays for the truth you didn't have the courage to say out loud? She does not have an answer. She is not sure anyone does. But she thinks, some nights, of that white ranunculus petal falling from the bouquet in her hands, drifting down slow and silent to the grass, and she wonders what might have grown differently if she had simply let herself fall with it. If this story found something true in you, if some part of you recognized that terrible, familiar weight of a silence you chose and have never quite put down, that's exactly what these stories are for. Let that feeling mean something. Like this video, share it with someone who's ever had to choose between the truth and the people they love. And subscribe to the channel, because there are so many more stories like this one still waiting to be told, carefully, all the way to the end, together.